And then I'm going to share my screen here. All right. We are looking at the 10 Commandments of marriage. Commandment number 8, thou shalt keep the home fires burning. If you got to keep the fire going. That's really the point of tonight's lesson, and that is really a matter of saying that marriage means work. This is really the key to understanding marriage. We talked a little bit about marriage this morning, and now we're back at it tonight. But it's important to remember that marriage does not just happen automatically. The wedding is only one day, and many people spend inordinate amounts of time preparing for a wedding and spend a lot of money and all these sorts of things investing in the wedding day. But what about the marriage? What happens after the wedding? That's really the part a lot of people don't think about too much. They just assume that it's going to be blissful happiness and happily ever after, and you'll never have a problem and all this kind of thing. But anyone that's been married for any length of time knows that's not true, and that it actually takes work to have a happy marriage. And most people will say that one of their top goals in life is to have a happy marriage. And Les and Leslie Parrott have a saying. They say that marriage won't make you happy. You make your marriage happy. So if you're unhappy, getting married is not going to cure that. But if you're, many people think it will. That's the funny part about it. And it seems like stating the obvious, but so many people think, well, if I could just get married, I'd be happy. And they expect that other person to make them happy. Well, the news is nobody else can make you happy. Only you can make yourself happy. You can get the joy of the Lord. You get happiness from other things. You can get happiness from serving others, and that may include a spouse, but marriage on its own will not make anyone happy. So you have to choose to do the work of making a happy home, a happy marriage, and a happy family. That's something that requires effort on our parts. There's an old poem that says, "Grow old along with me. The best is yet to be." And there's more to it, but that's really the gist of it, is that when you say I do, it's about asking that other person to grow old along with you. I always got a kick out of Brother Harry Lewis, apparently in his marriage proposal to his wife, asked her if she wanted to be buried with his people. And that was how he proposed marriage. But it was really a commitment to saying, I'm with you until death do us part. And even then, I want you to be buried beside me. And that's really meaning that, yes, you're going to grow old together. You're going to plan for the long haul, that there's going to be a best is yet to be component to your marriage. You don't think of the honeymoon as the best week of your marriage. That's when you just get started. There's a lot of much better things to come in your future. And sometimes people kind of get stuck in this, okay, well, there's this honeymoon period, and once that's over, we're in trouble. And that's really what we're going to look at here tonight. So marriage means work, and that really is a matter of choice. Marital happiness is something that we choose, and that's really important. A good marriage results from working hard and by putting the timeless principles of God's word at the center of the relationship. So we have to be conscious about that and be intentional. It comes when we do the things that keep our love growing and maturing, even during the tough times that surely will come. So we kind of have to plan it out ahead of time. I'm going to choose that even when things get tough or hard, we're going to do things God's way, and we're going to choose to have a happy marriage. We want to look at a marriage made in heaven. And, people talk about this, but this is literally a marriage made in heaven. This was a God orchestrated marriage. And we're going to look at the life of Isaac. In an era where men and women married at a very young ages, Isaac had passed his 40th birthday before he even met Rebekah. Why did it take Isaac so long to find the right one? Because he had determined to obey God, whatever the cost. Isaac lived in a pagan area where what we might say were slim pickings. True, all kinds of women lived all around, but Isaac knew better than to marry outside his faith. He wanted a woman who shared his trust in the one true God, and he refused to settle for anything less. If he couldn't find such a woman right away, he would remain single, and that's the way things stood for many years. And Isaac remained faithful to God. After Isaac's mother, Sarah, died, Abraham took it upon himself to change his son's marital status. In line with the custom of the day, Abraham commissioned one of his trusted servants to find Isaac a wife. In Genesis 24, 3-4, Abraham said, I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven, and the God of earth, that you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I live, but you will go to my country and to my relatives and take a wife for my son Isaac. And we won't bother to read the whole story, but the faithful servant set out to find a bride for Isaac. The servant obeyed his master's orders to the letter, going to extraordinary lengths to make certain he found just the right woman. At last, he encountered a charming, beautiful shepherdess. After getting acquainted with her, he had no doubt that God had chosen her to be the wife of his master's son. God answered some very specific prayers and made it very clear that this is the one for Isaac. Isaac waited for many months, maybe even a year or two, for his servant to return with his bride. With the following words, Scripture describes one of the most romantic moments in biblical history. Verses 63-67, Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, camels were coming. Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel. She said to the servant, who is that man walking in the field to meet us? And the servant said, he is my master. Then she took her veil and covered herself. The servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. Then Isaac brought her unto his mother Sarah's tent, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. And Scripture goes on to say he was comforted over his mother's death. A romantic story, you bet. It's also the story of a godly man waiting on the Lord to work out the details of his marriage. Isaac had the faith it took to believe that God would bring the right person to the right place at the right time. He and his family had prayed about his need and refused to compromise. The result speaks for itself, and he loved her. So we have this marriage truly made in heaven. God's put them together. He has arranged their marriage, even though Abraham and Abraham's servant were involved in the picture. It was really God that put them together as a result of the prayers of Abraham's servant in particular. But God had it all planned out, of course, in advance, that Rebekah would be the woman for Isaac. Now, when we consider how this marriage began, it seems impossible that the relationship could be anything but perfect. If you've got someone that God has picked out for you, how can you have anything less than a perfect marriage, right? Like it should be a no-brainer. Everything's going to be easy. It's going to be, perfect. This is the one God chose for you. Well, remember, God chose Eve for Adam too. They didn't have a smooth sailing marriage. But we can look at this thing here. We have this marriage made in heaven. But by the end of Genesis 27, after years of marriage and several children, duplicity, competition, antagonism, tension, and anger had elbowed their way into Isaac's family. Their problems just arose and then multiplied and multiplied. So this biblical account of a match made in heaven illustrates what every married couple needs to remember. Even marriages with the best of beginnings will have their share of problems. Over time, a brightly burning fire of love can fade and smolder, and if we are careless, it can flicker out altogether. Unless a husband and wife work hard to keep the fire alive, they can wake up one morning to find the warm breezes replaced by an Arctic breeze howling through their bedroom. And again, this comes back to it takes work to keep things going. So we want to look at 3 stages of marriage. This is quite insightful. Number 1 is the honeymoon stage. Most people who've been married have at least got to this stage. How can a couple keep their marriage from freezing over? How can they keep the fires of love and passion burning? Well, how do you keep any fire burning? You work at it, you feed it, tend it, encourage it, neglect it, and it will soon burn itself out. Same is true of marriage. It takes work, but if you persevere and faithfully apply God's principles to your marriage, you can enjoy a growing and exciting relationship. Success in fire building, whether in marriage or at the campground, also depends on understanding how fires burn over time and what they require at every stage. So that's why we're looking at these 3 stages. Nearly every married couple's passed through the honeymoon stage. During this stage, your mate can do no wrong. You simply can't get enough of one another. The honeymoon stage abounds with moonlight and roses, violins, and candlelight. The fire burns bright and hot, and you bask in its warm glow. It's a wonderful time. Everything's romantic and wonderful, and all these sorts of things. As we've seen, Song of Solomon offers the most romantic, erotic imagery in all of Scripture. It describes perfectly what goes on between a husband and wife during their honeymoon stage, when each focuses on and delights in the other person. Consider the passion that Solomon and his wife shared. And of course, in Song of Solomon, you have him and her back and forth. So he says, like a lily among the thorns, so is my darling among the maidens. He responds, like an apple tree among the trees of the forest, so is my beloved among the young men. In his shade I took great delight and sat down, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. He has brought me to his banquet hall, and his banner over me is love. Sustain me with raisin cakes, refresh me with apples, because I am lovesick. He responds, oh, my dove, in the clefts of the rock and the secret place of the steep pathway, let me see your form. Let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet, your form is lovely. She answers, my beloved is mine, and I am his. He pastures his flock among the lilies until the cool of the day, when the shadows flee away. Turn, my beloved, and be like a gazelle or young stag on the mountains of Beether. So we have this, love just oozing back and forth. They're just, head over heels. Solomon's love song pictures two people who spend all their time together, reveling in one another, and all their time apart, longing to come together again. Their passion burns white hot, consuming the young couple without burning them up. They want nothing more than each other. They feel completely taken with one another on all levels, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. So the problem with this is idealism colors the passion of the honeymoon stage. Both partners believe the other to be perfect in every way. You are altogether beautiful, my darling. There's no blemish in you. Chapter 4, verse 7. No more flawless a creature exists than the object of honeymoon stage love. They're just, the saying love is blind is never more true than in this stage of love. They just, they can't see anything wrong with that other person. They just want to be together all the time and everything. And we could go on and on about this, but that's where, many couples start out in marriage and they just think, well, that's the way it's always going to be. Well, that brings us to the next stage, and that's called the party's over stage. So the party's over stage is a bit of a rude awakening. This was where a couple truly gets to know one another. Reality sets in. Both partners begin to see one another's true humanity with all its flaws and imperfections. Start to annoy each other. Start to get disgruntled with one another a little bit. Many couples feel traumatized at the dawning of this stage. A little buyer's remorse may even set in. She begins to question if he's really the man she thought she married, while he wonders what happened to the sweet, lovely young thing he couldn't get enough of during the first years of marriage. Counselor Kay Kuzma writes that for most of us, our wedding day was one of the highlights of our lives, but the honeymoon is soon over and our courtship dreams of romance and candlelight too often dissolve into the reality of dirty dishes and diapers. And that's the reality sinks in and you start to wonder, oh, what happened here? Can't really see what I saw before. What's going on here? This is not the picture I thought I was going to paint. But if you've been married for any length of time, you've been here. Even Solomon, the hot-blooded young writer of the Song of Solomon, reached this stage. The same man who wrote of his young wife's perfection later wrote in Proverbs 27:15-16, a constant dripping on a day of steady rain and a contentious woman are alike. He who would restrain her restrains the wind and grasps oil with his right hand. Oh, this is like Chinese water torture. This is just terrible. This contentious woman, well, what happened to this guy that was writing about this, perfect young lady that could do no wrong? What must have been an even bleaker day, he penned the acidic words, I find more bitter than death the woman who is a snare, whose heart is a trap, whose hands are chains. The man who pleases God will escape her, but the sinner she will ensnare. That's Ecclesiastes 7, verse 26. Solomon's really having a hard time here. Well, when you have 1,000 women, you're going to have that kind of response. So it's hard to find a pleasant mental image anywhere in these harsh statements. Imagine trying to sleep while listening to the constant drip, drip, drip of heavy rain on the roof. Or ponder trying to go about your business with your feet in a snare, your heart tied in knots, and your wrists handcuffed together. That's the word picture Solomon paints of a husband who realizes the party's over. Of course, not all marital unhappiness can be laid at the feet of nagging or contemptuous wives, far from it. Bob acted very differently now than he did during their courtship and early months of marriage, one Christian psychologist wrote. Once, Bob was spontaneous and attentive. Gary loved the times of deep sharing of their hopes and dreams and fears and feelings. But after a year of marriage, things began to change. Bob became more and more interested in his new job and less attentive to Jerry. Their long talks became 5-minute quickies, more exchange of information than deep dialogue. When Jerry confronted him with this, he said she was being too sensitive. He loved her just as much as before. It was just that he was trying to show his boss that he could be counted on and that he was physically tired. At this stage of marriage, a couple must make a choice. At least 3 options lay open to husbands and wives who realize the party's over. First, they may adopt an attitude of glum resignation, determined to stick it out in the hope that something will happen. They live under the same roof in misery, trying hard to keep up the appearance of a happy union. They feel bored with each other, angry at each other, hostile toward each other, or indifferent toward each other, but because of the children or because they don't believe in divorce, they remain together. Second, they may opt for divorce. Far too many couples that get to the parties over stage become disillusioned with one another and choose to bail out. But there is good news. No couple needs to choose between living together in misery or ending their marriage. A third option exists. The couple who chooses this option decides not just to stay together, but do whatever it takes to make the marriage genuinely happy and healthy. So it's the choice to change things, to make things better, to choose to be happy, to choose to make their marriage work. And this is what we call the best is yet to be stage. So there is a third stage here, and that's called the best is yet to be stage. Couples who resolve to get through the parties over stage move on to the most exciting and rewarding stage of all, the best is yet to be. This stage stands against the old saying that love is blind. This love, mature love, is anything but blind. It sees everything in its beloved, all the character flaws and imperfections and quirks. It can't help but shower the spouse with words of deeds of affection and love. Nothing can kill this love. This kind of love can endure anything, even the radical changes that spouses sometimes undergo after years of marriage. I'm just going to move ahead here. Anyone can enjoy the best is yet to be stage so long as he or she applies some basic biblical principles to their marriage. And best of all, the mature love of this stage offers more genuine excitement and true romance per square inch than the honeymoon stage. Any husband or wife can happily look at a spouse of 5, 10, 15 or more years, even half a century, and honestly say, I'm so happy we get to grow old together. So this is a whole different level of love than what you might find in the honeymoon stage or the parties over stage. But this is what we would call mature love. If we look at the love chapter in 1 Corinthians 13, this gives us an idea of what mature love looks like. Love is patient. Love is kind and is not jealous. Love does not brag and is not arrogant. Does not act unbecomingly. It does not seek its own, is not provoked, does not take into account a wrong suffered, does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. I love the simplicity of this passage. Ed Young says, in many ways, it gives us a detailed explanation of our Lord's words, treat others the same way you want them to treat you. So the question is, how would you rate your love for your spouse? Not the other way around. Many people think, well, how do I rate their love for me? Well, that's pretty subjective. So let's come back to ourselves. We have no control over others anyway. So we can look at this from a checklist point of view. So you can say, how am I doing on this? Mature love is, number one, patient. I put up with imperfections of my mate. If they're trying my patience, I'm going to be patient anyway. That's not something I'm going to let them take away my patience. Number two, mature love is kind. I perform acts of kindness for the other person. Number three, joyful with truth. My love grows out of a base of honesty and integrity. Am I honest with my spouse? Am I joyful, rejoicing in the truth? Trusting, I believe in the best from my spouse. I don't assume the worst about them. Full of hope, I hope for the best for me and my mate, that there's hope of a better day, that the best is yet to come. Enduring, my love lasts throughout even the toughest of times. Of course, this really boils down to a lot of things when we talk about the unconditional love, that love is not based on feelings or conditions being met, but it's just I'm choosing to love sacrificially no matter what. So mature love is not, also based on 1 Corinthians 13, it's not jealous. Instead, it rests secure. It's not boastful. Instead, it refrains from building itself up. It's not arrogant. Instead, it humbles itself. It is not self-seeking. Instead, it puts spouse's needs and desires first. It is not angry. Instead, it refrains from rash outbursts. It's not looking for paybacks. Instead, mature love forgives even when treated wrongly, but most of all, love never fails. I'm always there to support my spouse. So there's this, again, it's till death do you part. So you're not going to fail until that day. So working toward a mature love can withstand every trial thrown its way. It lasts throughout the years, but only through choosing to do the work necessary to make it grow. So again, love is a choice. That's the number one thing people need to understand when it comes to love, is that love is a choice. Um, it's something you choose to do. And, I even think of when my wife and I were very early dating, and I had basically the choice put to me, do I want to pursue this relationship or not? And praying about it, I felt that was God's answer. It's like, well, it's up to you. You choose. Of course, I did choose. I decided I was going to love her. So I did. Even before I had any real strong feelings for her, I just made up my mind, okay, well, this is the way it's going to be. I'm going to choose to love her then. Of course, the feelings weren't long behind. But how do we work towards mature love? Number one, speak blessings. The best way to bury a marriage is for a husband and wife to keep digging at one another. And that will bury your marriage in a hurry. But if we can speak kindness, blessing, James 3, 9-10, Bible tells us the tongue is the toughest muscle in our body to control. With it, we bless our Lord and Father, and with it, we curse men who have been made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth cometh both blessing and cursing. Well, we don't want to be cursing or belittling our spouse, but we can certainly build them up. And some couples fall into the bad habit of belittling one another in the presence of others. They cut one another down, encouraged by laughter, firing off one-liners about what a mate said, how he sounds and looks, how much she eats or spends money, whatever. And it just becomes a really nasty thing. And then the other person starts to think that, well, maybe that's what that person really believes about me. So we have to be very careful how we speak of each other in our marriage. And that can be very, very helpful when you just choose to say, I'm going to always speak positive about my spouse. What else here? Become proactive and practice affirming comments and compliments that encourage your spouse. Just go out of your way to say something positive. And this will mean more to some than others. Some people, their love language is words of affirmation, and it will matter very much to them how you speak about them, whether it's positive or negative. And others, not so much, but it will still have an impact. So the word blessing comes from a combination of three terms: will, well, and word. So to speak a blessing on your husband or wife, speak a willing word and a well word. This produces healing and soothes any scars brought on by conflict. When blessing marks the pattern of communication between a husband and wife, the marriage moves forward into the mature love stage. It's important to let your spouse know you love them. Say it out loud. Don't have this mentality, well, I told you I loved you once when we got married, and if it ever changes, I'll let you know. That does not work. It needs to be reaffirmed on a regular, even daily basis. Yes, I still love you today. I'll love you again tomorrow, but I'll tell you that, right? So there has to be that, daily letting your spouse know you still love them. And again, you're putting more wood on the fire. If we're keeping the fires burning, toss some more wood on there with compliments and kindness and speaking blessing. That brings us to number 2, and that is to open up and confess. The popular 1970 movie Love Story, based on the equally popular novel by Eric Segal, had one famous line that cropped up everywhere on bumper stickers, posters, newspaper columns, and worse, it became the conventional wisdom of young people in love. The line, "Love means never having to say you're sorry." That statement drives me crazy. Nothing could be further from the truth. Love means having to say you're sorry a lot. Mature love drives the husband to ask forgiveness of his wife every time he realizes he's hurt her in any way. Mature love compels a wife to say, I'm sorry, and make amends whenever she sees she's wounded her husband. There has to be a quick readiness to apologize and recognize your own faults with each other, to be transparent and say, you know what, I need your forgiveness today. And this will go a very long ways in healing your marriage and helping you to grow stronger. Apostle James put it this way, therefore confess your sins to one another, pray for one another so that you may be healed. And we usually interpret this verse with regard to a sick human body. The principle can also apply, however, to an ailing marriage. If you want a marriage that burns brighter through the years, then open up and confess your sins to one another. And, that will bring a depth and intimacy to your marriage that wouldn't be there otherwise. So to move a marriage to the best is yet to be stage of married mature love, a man and woman must admit their wrong actions. Number 3, change yourself, not your mate. This is so important. You might still be thinking you can change other people. I hate to break it to you, you can't. The only person you can change is yourself. The problem is when people get married, the drive to revise can cause major problems. People get married and they say, oh, well, I'm going to change my husband, or I'm going to change my wife. And then they are very disappointed when it doesn't work. It does not work. It took 10 years of marriage to convince Elizabeth Cody Neuenhuis that she couldn't change her man into the vision enshrined in her brain. Admit it, she writes, we've all tried to change our husband, but after 10 years, I've finally wised up. Fritz went to Harvard, but he never learned that liquid spills become solid spills if not wiped immediately. I've tried educating him. I've yelled, I've cajoled, I've even gotten out the SOS pad and scrub, no change. I've decided it's a basic hormonal difference. Men don't scrub stoves because they literally don't see the spill. So rather than nag, I quietly wipe. Some big problems arise when we believe that it's our job to change the one we married. Maybe the wife believes she can change her husband, make him into a more organized or neater person, or the husband thinks he can change his wife to a more passionate lover. The result is usually frustration or worse. And just what you see is what you get. You know, that's what you chose to love. That's who you chose to marry. Then that's what you have to continue to choose to love and choose to marry. And you know, we're only responsible for one person, and that's ourselves when it comes to change. We can pray for God to change other people. We can pray for God to help them. Sometimes we try to change people's personality. That'll never happen. You know, they're hardwired when it comes to personality. Certain things are hardwired into certain genders. There's gender differences, different things like that. We cover all that when we do our Symbis. But there are some things that that's who the person is. They will never change. Now, if it's a behavior issue, you can let them know what your preferences are and hope they're listening. But at the end of the day, we can only change ourselves. So accept your husband or wife unconditionally and let God work on any necessary changes. I like that term, unconditional acceptance. We talk about unconditional love, but it's really unconditional acceptance will make a huge difference. If you've been wondering, how do you make marriage work without getting after each other all the time, that will help a lot. Just unconditional acceptance. And again, that doesn't mean that you just never let your preferences be known or ask for what you'd like to see happen around the house or whatever, but you can easily cross over into the line of nagging if you're constantly trying to change your spouse. And there's, trying to think of how to say this, but you can't do it. That's only God can change people. Number one, we're going to look at the making of a mature marriage. So we're going to look at the acronym MATURE to lay a solid foundation for the work required to enjoy a fulfilling marriage. So to become mature, be motivated. Number one, you know, it takes motivation to say, you know what, this is worth doing to work on our marriage. That don't just resign yourself to the way things are, but say, you know what, we can work towards having a much happier, more fulfilling marriage where, you know, we're both so happy. And, you know, do you want to please and bless God? You know, remember, marriage is a symbol or a type of Christ and the church. I want to be the best example of that I possibly can be. And I believe my wife shares that vision. So we work towards having the best possible marriage we can have because we want to represent Christ well. That's really the spiritual side of it. It's of course the great benefit of that is we have a wonderful marriage, but that's really the goal here, is to please the Lord. So when we have that as our motivation as well. Number two, we want to be attentive. Attentiveness is key to any good marriage. Pay attention to your mate's thoughts, feelings, and needs. Become a student of your spouse. Carefully note his or her likes and dislikes, strengths and weaknesses, pet peeves, and personal delights. Note them and then act on them. No one can put the spark back in a marriage and move into the third stage of marriage without developing habits of attentiveness. My wife she is the expert in this area. I'll say something in the middle of a conversation, just not even realizing what I'm saying. And my birthday will come and I'll be opening something that's like, oh, how did you know I wanted this? And she's like, well, you mentioned it one time, you know. And I'm like, just like in casual conversation. And then she remembers that and goes out of her way to, you know, make sure I get that for my birthday or Christmas or something. I'm like, how did you think of this? Like, I have nowhere near that level of attention. I don't know if I'm even capable of it, but she does it on a regular basis. So I'm like, wow, this is attentiveness can go a long way. And I've had to work at it. I'm not as attentive, but I've tried to make it a goal of mine to be more attentive. Number 3 is tender. The Apostle Paul tells us to be tender-hearted in Ephesians 4:32. Any man who wants a successful marriage must learn to be tender with his wife. At the same time, even the biggest, toughest, and roughest man needs tenderness from his wife. So go out of your way to find creative methods of demonstrating tenderness and use them every day. Number 4 is understanding. This kind of goes back to our earlier commandment to continually communicate, seek to understand your spouse, seek to understand where they're coming from, and that will go a long, long way to create empathy and really strengthen your marriage. Number 5 is respectful. Everyone wants to feel respected, to know that his or her opinions and thoughts are valued by another, especially by a spouse. Ephesians 5 suggests a sort of reverence between a husband and wife, a respect that goes much deeper than in other relationships. Submitting to one another out of respect, of course, doesn't always mean that two people agree. And this is important to remember, that if you never have a disagreement, then somebody is getting walked all over. You're two different people, you're going to have different opinions, you're going to have different views. And the key is to respect each other's differences. And you don't have to agree on everything, but you do have to respect one another to see your marriage mature. So such respect gives husbands and wives the ability to submit to one another. That brings us to number 6. That's excited. The best is yet to be stage can provide even more excitement than the first months of the honeymoon stage. That's one of the most fulfilling things in marriage. My wife and I think this year is 19 years since we said I do. And it's, wonderful. And, I don't even know how we got to this 19 years. It seems like a long time when I say it. But at the same time, it feels like we haven't been married all that long. But it just, I've stayed in the honeymoon stage for a long, long time. But actually, it's this mature love stage. And it is so rewarding. It is so wonderful. And, my wife and I were talking about this afternoon. I said, yeah, we've reached this. We're in this mature love stage in our marriage. And that's not to say we've got everything down perfect, but, we've kind of gone through the hoops and hurdles of the earlier stages of love, and we're thankful. And we have a very mature love now, and we're very thankful for that. So we all want a best is yet to be marriage, one in which our love will grow and last. Just coming back to the poem I mentioned earlier, it says, not once be praise be thine, I see the whole design. I who saw power see now love perfect too. Perfect I call thy plan, thanks that I was a man. Maker, remake, complete, I trust what thou shalt do. That God can be the one to finally put everything together the way it needs to be. And, whatever stage of love you're in, I want you to know that God has a greater marriage for you than even what you're experiencing now. That you can grow into even greater depths and levels in love for one another, and even learn more about the Lord along the way, that he can continue to be the center of your marriage. So reflecting on your relationship, there's some key points here, some questions we could ask ourselves. Number 1, how important is it to you to work in making your marriage a happy, passionate, loving one? Again, I don't expect anyone here to answer this, but just questions to ask yourself and explain that. Number 2, in what stage of marriage are you today? What steps do you need to take to move on to the next stage? You're in one of these stages, what's going to take to move you to the next level? Number 3, do you consider your marriage a loving, passionate one now? Explain what can you do to make it so if it's not? 4, in what areas of mature love are you strong? Explain where are you weak and what can you do about it starting today? Again, that's that acronym of motivated, attentive, tender, understanding, respectful, and excited. So what can you do in each of those areas? And if you're single, I know I've been saying that a lot of these principles apply regardless. Remember that love is a choice. Remember that a lot of these keys here to just showing love to others, attentiveness, understanding. These will work in any relationship, you know, respect, obviously. These are all things that we can apply to any relationship, and really found it very interesting. I shared it on my Facebook yesterday. It was a fairly lengthy speech by Jordan Peterson, and he was talking about finding the right mate. He says he gets asked this question more than any other. How do you know you found the right one? And he was talking about, he actually gave the same answer I give to that question, that you need to work on yourself. Become the kind of person that the perfect mate will be attracted to. That, you know, if you found the perfect person, why wouldn't they walk away in disgust and want nothing to do with you? You know, that's kind of the way he explained it. You know, why would they even want to talk to you, right? Like, what would make them attracted to you? Why would they want to give you the time of day? So work on yourself and becoming that perfect spouse for somebody else. And when they meet you, they'll be like, oh, I found the perfect person. Because again, I can't control other people, but I can control myself. So if I want to find the right person, I have to work on becoming someone that will be attractive to the person that I'm looking for. And I find that's very helpful for anyone that's single. If you want a spiritual person in a spouse, then seek to be spiritual yourself. If you want someone that's a prayer warrior, spend time in the prayer room. You know, if you want someone that's, you know, serving the Lord and all those sorts of things, then go where you're going to be there too. You know, you're going to be serving the Lord, and you'll meet each other as you're serving Him. And again, it's that first triangle we talked about, where as you both get closer to God, you get closer to each other. And if God is calling you to the same areas of ministry, and I believe that God does call couples together, you're going to start bumping into each other in those areas, in those realms where you're serving together. So that's just some things I've learned over the years, but I thought it was interesting, and the video I shared yesterday is worth watching. So a lot of quotable things in there from a psychologist perspective that's recently come to faith, but it was quite a fascinating video. All right, I'm going to stop the recording here. Thank you for watching. If you're watching this later on YouTube,